Welcome to the Collaborative Science Restoration series. This is Nick Soberall with the Science Collaborative. Today's webinar is the fourth entry in our ongoing Collaborative Science Conversation series, which we co-host with NOAA's Restore Science Program. Move on to the next slide here, just a few housekeeping items that much people are joining. So here's the agenda for today's discussion. I've got some housekeeping stuff, as I mentioned, and then we'll basically turn it over to Caitlin and Doug, who are going to introduce our speakers for the day. Speakers will get a chance to introduce themselves, then we'll just jump into the discussion and we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. As you probably noticed, all attendees are muted upon entry, and we'll be handling questions today via the Q&A feature and Zoom. Using GoToWebinar in Zoom's questions feature. So there's a separate feature for Q&A that you can use here. You can enter questions to the presenters as they occur to you throughout the webinar using this feature, and we'll discuss as many as we have time for at the end of today's webinar. Chat is visible to everybody, so you can feel free to talk amongst yourselves, and you can also use it to alert organizers of any technical issues. Just make sure you toggle the little thing to say, host and panelists, and it'll come to us instead. A new thing here to talk about, informed consent. So webinars are a very valuable learning opportunity for us as a program. Insights from speakers and participants like you can help inform how we support others in doing collaborative science. For example, in the development of future workshops and webinar resources such as tools, tips, and case studies to add to our Guide to Collaborative Science, which is an open access resource, so anybody can look at it. It's on our website. And with that in mind, I want to inform attendees that if you do share insights or feedback with us, for example, in the chat or via the exit survey that launches after the webinar closes, it may be used for program learning and development. Please note that if we do capture something, like a direct quote from you that we'd like to use for learning purposes, we will reach out to you ahead of time and seek permission and provide an explanation of what we would use it for. So we're grateful for the opportunity to learn alongside you. Okay. So a bit about the reserve system, the Science Collaborative, and the webinar series. So the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, it's a national network of 30 unique reserves, as shown on this map. It's a NOAA program that works in collaboration with a local place-based partner, either a state agency, university, or nonprofit at each site. Each reserve site includes programs focused on the activities you see on the slide. So those include land stewardship, research and scientific monitoring, training programs for the public and local officials, and education. And the Science Collaborative supports science for estuarine and coastal decision makers by coordinating regular funding opportunities and supporting user-driven collaborative research and transfer activities that address critical coastal management needs identified by the reserves. The Collaborative Science for Estuaries webinar series features project teams supported by the Science Collaborative, program staff, and partners like today's webinar. And speakers share their unique approaches to addressing current coastal and estuarine management issues. So as I mentioned at the start, today's webinar is the fourth entry in our ongoing Collaborative Science Conversation series, which we co-host with NOAA's Restore Science Program. And in this series, both programs team up to bring you the voices of project teams from the field and dig into the unique value of collaborative science, what it feels like in practice, and tips and strategies for success. And I think with that, I would like to turn it over to Doug and Caitlin. So those are our moderators for today who are going to give us a bit of context and do some stage setting for today's discussion. So with us here is Caitlin Young, the science coordinator for the NOAA RESTORE Science Program, and Doug George, the program manager for the NERRS Science Collaborative. And I'll hand it over to you guys.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. I think Caitlin and I are going to tag team just a really quick hello from our two programs. As Nick said, I'm the program manager from the NERRS Science Collaborative here at NOAA, and did a great intro about what the NERRS Science Collaborative and the NERRS system are all about, that we bring science to application. That's our core mission within the NERRS system, and the Science Collaborative supports that through providing competitive funding and resources to develop the capacity and understanding and broaden the collaborative science approach throughout the system and through our partners. We really embrace working with our NOAA partner here, Restore, in putting on these webinars for you all. And I don't have much more to say than that. So welcome. We're looking forward to learning from our three panelists quite a bit. So Caitlin, what do you want to tell us about the Restore program?
Thanks, Doug. My name is Caitlin Young, and I'm the science coordinator for the Restore Science Program. The Restore Science Program was established with penalty money from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and we're a cross-NOAA program that funds science to inform natural resource management in the Gulf of Mexico. In all of our work, we really focus on co-production of science, and we ask that both researchers and resource managers are part of a research team when they apply for funding to us. We also support co-production and collaborative science through co-production workshops and other types of engagement activities around the Gulf of Mexico. Our program supports both short-term research and that is focused on a specific resource management decision, as well as long-term research that is typically on trends and variability in the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. And really our goal in funding this mixture of short and long-term research with an emphasis on co-production is that by the end of the lifetime of our program, we've improved the community's holistic understanding of the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. So we have a number of, reasons that we work with the Science Collaborative on these types of webinars. We really wanted to bring together these two NOAA programs that are specifically focused on co-production of science and share with our communities the important aspects of the collaborative science approach. We work in different geographies, but we cover similar topics and we listen to the needs of our target audiences. And we see similar themes coming up no matter where we work across the US. Over the years, we've covered designing science for coastal decision-making, working across jurisdictional boundaries, and career pathways for those thinking about approaching their work through a co-production or collaborative science pathway. At the core of our programs is to help our teams build trust through their projects with the anticipation that it will last for the projects once the project's officially completed. So we're really looking for this long-term sustainability of the project teams and the networks and communities that are built through the projects that we fund. I think I'm going to pass it back to you here, Doug. We can talk a bit about why meaningful engagement is really critical for both of our programs.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. And yeah, I see some in the chat. We have more discussion right now than slides. So if you're looking for slides, you just get to see our smiling faces. So I hope you enjoy them, or you could cover your screen. So the message or the topic of today is meaningful engagement. And so Caitlin and I wanted to share a little bit about what meaningful engagement means to our programs before we start drilling in with our speakers. So we want to get off the stage quickly, so we're going to do this fast. As those of you who are familiar with the reserve system and those this is new to you, at its core, our reserve system is place-based stewardship of our protected spaces. And so the size and the design, the location of the reserves determines the communities that we'll be interacting with and that participate in that reserve's work. And so we can't take a one-size-fits-all kind of approach for meaningful engagement because it varies by reserve and it varies by communities that the reserve might be working with. So we've designed our grants from the program to help reserve staff focus on relationships as they're doing their science. So yes, there's science forward, but there's relationships that are being built throughout the whole process. And we want to allow for flexibility within the projects, or for the projects to adapt as information from engagement comes into a project and might morph it a little bit from what was originally considered and proposed. And if, for example, like in our RFPs, request for proposals, we encourage applicants to think about providing honoraria, for providing funds for refreshments at community meetings, for providing funds for dependent care, so that we can bring in all the people that might have barriers to traditional approaches of engagement. So we want to encourage that to grow throughout all of our project space. And then programmatically, we try and practice what we preach. And we focus on building good relationships with, for example, with tribal nations. That's an important part of our work because these reserves are located by lands that are now occupied. So we try and approach all of our relationships with tribal nations with patience, with intentionality, and with respect, because we're speaking to another nation. And we want to create that healthy space to talk about concerns that a tribe or multiple tribes may have when dealing with cultural or historical artifacts that might be at risk during projects that are funded through the Science Collaborative. So it's not without learning along the way. So it's not a straight line to perfection here, but it's a constant engagement that that we are seeking both programmatically and then try and support with our projects that we fund. Caitlin, what about the Restore program? How do you see meaningful engagement as part of how you approach things?
Yeah, meaningful engagement is really critical to the Restore Science program. We're a relatively young program. We've only we had our first funding competition in 2015. And the Deepwater Horizon penalties, they provided significant funds for restoration actions, but relatively less funds for science to inform restoration and science and natural resource management in the Gulf. So in focusing on the science that's going to inform resource management, we understand that meaningful engagement is really critical to understanding what are the resource management needs. So we do things like hold engagement sessions with regional stakeholders when we're writing our funding opportunities. We have funded planning grants that support meaningful engagement during the project development phase, with the goal of not just providing, of course, a leg up to people who might want to apply to us in the future, but also to other funding programs so that project teams have the ability to be established when they get to the point where they're ready to apply for funding. We evaluate proposals and project performance based on how effectively those projects' findings and products are going to be taken up by the resource managers that are on the teams that are applying to us. And this is a comprehensive approach. It's a bit time consuming, but we find it yields excellent results. So we do have like a long-term project that's going on right now that's focused on using passive acoustic monitoring to understand the movements of marine mammals in the Gulf of Mexico. And that project discovered that there is the endangered Rice's whale in the Western Gulf of Mexico. The project already had the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management as one of its natural resource managers on the team. And so when they discovered the Rice's whale was present in the Western Gulf of Mexico, that really added to the BOEM's ability to do their consultations on things like offshore wind installations, which is a new development in the Gulf of Mexico. And so because BOEM is a partner on the project and they had continuous meaningful engagement with the PIs, they're able to use that data in their consultations for environmental compliance pretty quickly. And so they're able to take up the data and use the data. And that's really one of the goals that we have overarching in our program. So do you want to talk a bit more about meaningful engagement in the NERRS Science Collaborative, Doug?
I think I've covered it pretty well so far, but what I'm thinking is I'd love to hear from the audience now. And Caitlin and I have given you a bit of a framing from where where both of us are coming from in our programs and where NOAA more broadly is thinking. But if we could throw the question in the chat is, thank you, Megan. What does meaningful engagement? Why does let me try that again. Why does meaningful engagement matter to you and your work? And we'll just take a moment here to allow you to articulate. We have a nice, big, healthy group today, so hopefully we'll have some interesting comments come in while everyone is thinking about that. And you can just throw it right back into that chat if you have any answers. And while people are coming up with that, Caitlin, it's refreshing to hear some, examples both, out at sea, and some of the work that you're doing out at sea, and some of the work that we focus more on the estuarine and watershed environments. That this topic is really important for spanning across the whole of the water cycle space. So I really appreciate that example of marine mammals out in the ocean. We have examples on the Great Lakes that we're going to hear about today. So it's salty to fresh, fresh to saltwater. Okay, so we're getting some comments in. This is really great. We have so why is meaningful engagement matter to you? Do not want to waste their or our time. And another one, without engaging our stakeholders on the project objectives, design, and products, we risk missing what's important to our customers. Oh, great. They're rolling in now. It opens doors for new and innovative ideas and conversations. Sometimes new ideas are actually indigenous practices that have been going on for centuries. Thank you. Kimberly, Steve, Olivia, Allison says, meaningful engagement is critical to the success of our government partners because they need buy-in and participation for their programs to function. And then Don, sorry, things moved for a second. It offers authenticity, drives my dedication. Love that word. Helps me when I feel like helps me not feel like I'm in a vacuum. No one likes to be in a vacuum. I think we'll just take a couple more here. John says, we are working to advance community resilience. This can't be done effectively without communities being engaged in and able to inform the process. Very, very true. And then Deanna shares, it's as true when it comes to land as anything else. Nothing about us without us. We won't improve the well-being of our landscapes long-term without doing so holistically with our communities, hearing what they need. Julie shares, help guide and inform our place resource manager and stewardship. Eva shares, meaningful engagement is core to my work because Rocky Habitat site management plans that we are developing will live with communities through community science initiatives and interpretation programs. I really like that live with communities, and that implies that it's going to live much longer than that particular project or funding cycle is complete. So I think we'll pause there. I mean, keep them coming. This is great. We record all of this, and we'll use this information back out. But I think now, why don't we get off the screen, Caitlin? Who are we going to hear from today?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really great, that last one about it's going to live on with the communities, because today, we're going to hear from Laura Reynolds, and she's an assistant professor of coastal ecology at the University of Florida. She's funded by the Restore Science Program on a project that aims to improve seagrass beds in aquatic preserves along Florida's nature's coast. And that project team is co-led by Florida's Department of Environmental Protection, and they're engaging with the recreational fishers to develop ways to reduce the boat propeller scarring in seagrass beds. So, when you think about projects that are going to live on in time, and this is really the goal of this type of project, right? Because there's this distributed nature to recreational fishing community. And this project has really had to employ a lot of meaningful engagement tools to try to access all the different aspects of the recreational fishing community. And we want the solutions that are developed in conjunction with the community for how to reduce scarring in seagrass beds to live on. And we want those recreational fishers to be able to take those up and understand why it's so important to take these actions and save the seagrass beds in Florida's nature coast. So I'm really happy to have Laura Reynolds here with us today.
All right, thank you.
Great. Are you? I'll bring in the other two folks, and then we will let you have fun together. So welcome Hannah. Hannah Ramage, who's from Lake Superior, NERR, and she's worked there for 7 years as the monitoring coordinator, and she oversees the system-wide monitoring program in the St. Louis River estuary, and she mentors students, conducts water quality research, works closely with partners on how best to collect and use data to the benefit of all estuary users. And she is currently one of our leads on a collaborative research grant aimed at creating a more targeted and efficient monitoring plan to detect algal blooms and hypoxia in the estuary. She's kind of doing everything there, along with everyone else who does everything there. And Hannah, just, the reason why we really were excited to have her join this conversation today is that she participated in an interview process for our research on meaningful engagement, and she provided some amazing insights. So we wanted her to come and talk today to speak about meaningful engagement, both as an intended user of that engagement and a project leader. So welcome, Hannah.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, great to have you here. And then last, if we could bring Ariana in or on screen. So Ariana Stokes is one of the staff of the NERRS Science Collaborative. We're really happy to have her on staff now. So welcome. This is her second webinar actually with us. We'll talk about that in a moment. She's a research associate with the Science Collaborative, and her work helps support opportunities for peer-to-peer learning and developing collaborative science resources, program communications. So she's filling a lot of holes and adding to our small team. So we're really happy to have her here. Prior to this, she finished her graduate degree at University of Michigan, and where she was working with the Science Collaborative on research about meaningful engagement. So she's especially tooled well for today's conversation because her research was what we brought that research forward in a webinar earlier this year, and you can always find those links on our YouTube page. And so I think with that, we are going to turn it over to Ariana to lead us through the next phase of our webinar and conversation. So have fun, you three.
Thanks so much, Doug and Caitlin. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll let Hannah and Laura introduce themselves, and we'll get into a conversation. So as Doug mentioned, I'm a research associate with the NERRS Science Collaborative, and I recently finished my master's degree at the University of Michigan, where I studied environmental policy and environmental justice. And as Doug mentioned, over the past year, I've been working with the Science Collaborative to study what meaningful engagement really means. And as part of this research, I had the opportunity to talk with so many amazing practitioners and researchers across the reserve system, and it's an honor to have another opportunity for a conversation with two more incredible researchers today, Hannah and Laura. Before we get into this conversation, I wanted to give just a little bit more background about the research that the Science Collaborative has been doing on meaningful engagement. Over the years, meaningful engagement has been a recurring topic of discussion among project teams at the Science Collaborative, but there's been surprisingly little empirical research that distinguishes engagement from meaningful engagement. The occurrence of engagement does not guarantee the occurrence of meaningful engagement. So the Science Collaborative undertook research to systematically unpack what makes engagement meaningful within the context of collaborative science. And as Doug mentioned, part of this research included interviews with researchers across the reserve team. And we learned from these interviews that there is no one-size-fits-all answer for achieving meaningful engagement. What it looks like often varies from project to project. It is, like so many other aspects of collaborative science, very context-dependent. However, we found consistent themes which can help us build a framework for advancing meaningful engagement within collaborative science and more broadly. And we covered these findings in an earlier webinar hosted by the Science Collaborative, which the link is already in the chat. Thank you, Megan. But the goal of today's webinar is not to recount those findings, but instead to do a deep dive into some of the practical realities of meaningful engagement. Because meaningful engagement is so context dependent, we thought it would be useful to explore it in context by highlighting specific examples and stories from projects. And that's why we have Hannah and Laura here today. So shall we get to it?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I thought if you wanted to give a little bit of an introduction and maybe share a little bit about how and why meaningful engagement matters to you and your work. And then I have a few more other questions lined up for you.
Sounds good. I'm unmuted, so I'll start and then pass it to you, Laura, if that's okay. So yeah, Doug introduced me as Hannah. I do want to just take a second and tell you where I'm from and who I am a little bit so that you can trust any of the words that come out of my mouth. And we're going to be talking a lot about building trust. So first thing is to build a relationship. I'm going to try to build a relationship with all 116 of you very quickly right now. So Hannah, And I am originally from Traverse City, Michigan, so grew up in the Great Lakes. I took many different jobs and career changes and educational changes throughout my life, traveled out west, lived in Alaska, all that sort of stuff, but found my way back here to the Great Lakes region, where I now work at the Lake Superior Reserve. So I am physically located on the St. Louis River estuary, which is in the far western tip of Lake Superior. And I have the honor of running our monitoring program here. So that includes water quality. We have a weather station. We also do some biological monitoring, meaning wetland plants. And then recently, I've been evolving in my job to take on more leadership roles in research. And so my conversation with Ariana was really me as a newbie PI figuring stuff out. So when I got the invitation to be here, I was kind of shocked. But I do think I've been asked to do that before in early career stages when it's like, wow, you're really put through the ringer at first and you're learning really fast some things that work and don't work. So I'm really happy to be given the chance to reflect on some things myself as I've been preparing for this webinar, and hopefully distill down some things that I think might be useful for those that are delving in or pros and want to learn from someone like brand new that might have something new to say. So I've worked in a few collaborative spaces. One is more of a rough and tumble group that isn't funded, that gets together all the time, called the St. Louis River Habitat Work Group. So that's a group I've been a part of for 7 years now, and made up of 20 plus organizations, a revolving door of folks involved in really protecting and restoring habitat in the estuary. And then I've been involved with 2 science collaborative projects, one that was looking at refining techniques for high frequency chlorophyll readings. And then, as Ariana mentioned, a PI for a new project we're in the middle of right now, where we're both trying to investigate why phytoplankton community changes are happening in our estuary, and also really pave the way for a new practical way to monitor going forward. So as we talk through some of the questions, you know, a little bit more of what I've been involved in as I reference those kind of 3 things mostly. So hope that gives you a sense of who I am. I'll pass it off to Laura.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Laura, and I'm an academic. I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida. I consider myself a coastal ecologist who often works in seagrass systems. So I often say that I want to understand the stability of seagrass systems, why some seagrass meadows are more resistant to disturbances than others. But why I've been asked to tell you why meaningful engagement is part of this work. So very practically, as a faculty member, my primary goals are 2 of my primary roles in my job are 1, to get grants, and 2, to mentor students. And frankly, there are amazing grant opportunities that require meaningful engagement. And the NOAA RESTORE and NERRS Science Collaborative are 2 fine examples of that. Further, the students that come to work with me tend to be really bright folks who don't want to do science for science. They want to do science that makes a difference. They want to do science that's used in management, conservation, and restoration. And to do that effectively, you really have to have meaningful relationships and work closely with people who are actually doing management, conservation, and restoration. Now, of course, I'm overstating that. I don't just do that as part of my job. I am just like those students who come to me, and that I want my work to be used in a really practical way. But making links to science and management is not particularly simple. Most academics, you guys probably all know and complain about them pretty regularly, do experiments, they write papers, and the final paragraph in that paper tends to be a paragraph that states how practitioners should use their information. I have done this. I continue to do this, but I do know that this is insufficient and ineffective. So what I want to do is tell you, like, over my career so far, how I've learned how to be more effective than just that final paragraph of an academic paper. The first story I'm going to tell you is from a really long time ago. It was in between my master's and my PhD. I was working as a research technician in San Francisco Bay. And around that time, there was a new Bay Bridge being built from San Francisco to Oakland. And they had to dredge some seagrass meadows to create this new bridge. That meant that there was some mitigation money that went to my boss, who was Kathy Boyer at the time. And it went to her because when she started her job, she took time to go and meet managers and policymakers. And so they knew who to go talk to when they had an issue. So we got this money and we worked together for about 2 years. We brought folks from all over the United States to San Francisco Bay. They told us about how their stories about how they had restored seagrass, what their successes were, what their pitfalls were, and we took their information and we tested it locally. And this was awesome. I was doing science that was going to be used. I was having fun, and it really pushed me to think and trust in my ability to do really good applied science. That continued through my PhD work. I worked on a seagrass restoration in Virginia. And I was lucky after my PhD and postdoc to land a job at University of Florida and in IFAS. University of Florida is a land-grant university, which means that we participate in not only research and teaching, but also extension. And what that means is that engaging with the public, with land managers, and people outside of academia is not only okay, it is really required. And more importantly, it means that I work with a group of people who are extension agents who do that all of the time. They engage with the public, land managers, and conservationist practitioners. So that means I have a group of people to learn how to engage meaningfully with. I have people to go to and learn those skills. I also have some really good built-in collaborators, and I think that's important because I'm a scientist. I'm good at science. I have good science skills. I'm learning my extension skills, my engagement skills, but it's never going to be my strongest point. And so having these built-in collaborators to do that with me is really important and has it served me well. So because of this job where I am, and because of the help of these extension agents that I work with, I think my work now is better than just that final paragraph at the end of the scientific paper that we've sort of all seen. I think I do have meaningful relationships with managers and practitioners who can share their needs with me and trust me to give them products that are not jargony and that are in a format that they can actually use. And this is a two-way street. They're giving me information, I'm giving them information. And just a couple of examples about what that means now in my daily work. I work with water management districts across Florida that come to me and say, I need to answer this question, and I help design experiments to answer specific questions that they come to me with. I co-chair a Seagrass Technology Council with Marine Lab around Florida, and what this does is brings together scientists and practitioners to ID questions and uncertainties that we have that prevent us from having a holistic seagrass restoration plan for the state. And the reason that I'm here is that I am an investigator on two projects from the NOAA RESTORE program from the last Actionable Science Call. As Caitlin said, one works with Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which manages the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. And we are working on strategies to understand and mitigate propeller scars and seagrass meadows in that preserve. I'm actually part of two projects. The other is working to provide guidance for restoration in the Chandeleur Islands in Louisiana. And that will inform long-term monitoring and adaptive management plan for seagrasses that live there as we restore these islands. And that's really important because this is the only place where seagrasses are growing in Louisiana. So it's a really special place. So I'm really excited over this next webinar to talk to you about these projects and how I have used meaningful engagement in those projects.
Thank you so much, Laura and Hannah, for giving a little bit more about your background and how you see meaningful engagement playing a role in your work. I love that both of you mentioned trust. And Laura, I love that you brought up that there are now funding opportunities that are requiring meaningful engagement. And I think that demonstrates the urgency that we all understand and have a shared understanding of what is meaningful engagement. And if we are requiring that we're doing it in our work, what is it that we're measuring, or what's the standard that we're all using? So people are often curious about what meaningful engagement actually looks like. So I want to start off with a question about the telltale signs of meaningful engagement. How do you know when project engagement is meaningful to those involved? What are the sorts of things that you're looking for? And Hannah or Laura, feel free to jump in.
Sure, I'll jump in. It was fun to really think about this question because I feel like there's some obvious things that we could all say, like people show up, people fill out your doodle poll when you send it. Like the very tangibles, like people keep showing up. They participate and speak if you're in a discussion-based meeting. They talk and give ideas. Like there's some things that are fairly like obvious and tangible. I think another thing that comes up a lot for me is like, did that go well? Like self-reflecting, like, did that meeting go well? It was like, someone said, hey, that was fun. Like that could be somehow a clue that you hit a mark with, at least with one person. Like, hey, that was fun. As in like, not only did I show up to this meeting, we got some things done, but like I enjoyed being there. So the things that people say, like that kind of direct positive feedback. And then I think some of the other ways you can tell is sort of a slow roll. Like someone who was a part of a project comes to you a year later and wants to work with you is a sign that you meaningfully engage them in the past project because they want to work with you again. You have built trust with them and they're like, let's go on to the next project. So that's kind of a longer term maybe clue. And then just like sometimes the engagement is quieter and harder to detect. Like sometimes you'll have people that maybe aren't the most talkative at a meeting and that can feel like they're not engaged. But then you have a private conversation with them afterwards and you find out, like based on what they say, that they've got a new idea that they're starting on because of a discussion that happened, with your group. So there's kind of big obvious ones, long-term ones, and then sort of the unexpected quieter moments where you're like, I think this is resonating with people.
Thanks. I had a lot of those similar thoughts and similar observations, and I was thinking that I might tell you what I'm looking for by telling you a little story of like what the meaningful engagement that led up to this NOAA RESTORE project for why I'm here. I'm going to talk about this project, but I want to make sure I very quickly up front say this is a collaborative project. And when I say I, it is not I. Florida Department of Environmental Protection is a key partner in this. Savannah Berry, who is a regional extension agent at the Nature Coast Biological Station, is as well. But I'll start with what happened, and that was the creation of the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserve. And that happened because Pew Charitable Trust went around the community, and they, with a real grassroots effort, they were talking to folks, selling the idea that we needed an aquatic preserve. They gained consensus, and they took that consensus to the legislature and convinced them to sign a new aquatic preserve into the legislature. That meant that Florida Department of Environmental Protection was now tasked with managing this new aquatic preserve. And so they called us up at UF-IFAS in Florida Sea Grant, and they asked us to help with creating the management plan. And that, again, was a big multi-step process. The first was to lay the groundwork with what we knew about the aquatic preserve before it was established. And to do that, we worked with Hannah Brown, who is one of the conveners on this call. And she has a lot of experience with journalism, and she's really good at interviews. And she conducted 40 interviews for us with local community members, with subject matter experts, with community members with business owners, fishing guides to really understand that system. And then we got to the hard work, which was creating what the major issues that the aquatic preserve would tackle for the next 10 years. To do that, we held 2 public meetings to understand what the public wanted. We created a management advisory council, and they met 4 times, again, to decide what those issues were. We were able to do that, create that council, because we had Pew's interaction with people. We had Hannah's interactions with people, so we knew who to invite. After that management plan was created, propeller scarring was identified as a priority issue for the aquatic preserve, and 10 of the associated strategies that should be addressed in the next 10 years were related to propeller scarring. And many stakeholders, through our interviews, through our meetings, suggested that we create no motor zones to protect seagrass meadows. Now, as you can guess, this could be a pretty controversial topic. And if someone is going to create to limit access, then they need to fill all of the uncertainties. They need to know scientifically what that will do. They need to know economically what that will do. They need to know that there is support in their community. And that's the proposal that we took to NOAA Restore, was to fill those uncertainties, and at the end, give FDEP a product where they can decide what the best management strategy for dealing with prop scar damage is. With this project, we have another management advisory council. We created a new one specifically for this project. And those folks are community members, they are fishing guides, they are business owners in the region. And these people voluntarily meet twice a year to help us make sure the products we produce as part of this project are comprehensive and will work for FDP as we as we finish up the project. There's a couple of things that I want to point out about this project that I think help, or this engagement that I think show how it is meaningful. The first is that it's iterative. And this project started many years before the funded project actually started. And it actually started way before my story started. I and Savannah were working very closely with the FDPE managers. We had a relationship. We could call them up. And they probably wouldn't have called us if we didn't have that relationship to start with. And there's many types of meaningful engagement that we talked about here. There's grassroots, going around talking to people in bars or in docks. There is formal interviews. They're creating advisory panels and group meetings. And I often talk about the group meetings because that's what I do. But all of those layers are really important. This has been a very successful process, and I see it as successful in part because we have so many people who are coming back for more. Fishing guides, business folks, community members, land managers who keep engaging with us and donating their time for the greater good. I also want to point out that we hired a lot of people with specialized skills. Hannah was really good, had some background in journalism, was really good at interviews. We had Pew, who were really good at getting out and talking to people. We hired a trained facilitator. We all have different skills, and it really took all of those skills together to have a successful process. I said before, I'll say it again, I'm good at science, and I appreciate these other skills, but they're not my strength, so it's good to bring other people together to do that. And finally, I want to say that this is an example of a project where things worked well, but it's not a recipe book. I've been parts of projects that I think are very successful that look quite different. That second NOAA Restore project that I'm on was originally funded as part of a planning grant. And so we sat down as a group over Zoom every month for a year and worked together that way in a very formulaic way that was meant to build this proposal. And that's successful too, but it looks very different than the project that I just laid out for you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting last tidbit there that I was really thinking on as you said that. Like sometimes it looks like a very formal process that went really well. Like experts knew what they were doing. You got to what you needed to do. People felt included, and it is very formulaic. And then sometimes it's wildly messy. So I feel like I'm on the other end of the spectrum with some of the projects that I work on. So I just wanted to chime in and say, yeah, that too, that I talked a little bit about that like quiet engagement, and something that I'm learning is that sometimes that the best intention of like a facilitated meeting that you're like, okay, we're gonna do all these activities to get people's input. We're gonna get what we need. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be fun. We got all the recipes in place, and then there's just like a few people that you notice don't say a lot or didn't show up, and you don't know why. And so then that's where the more like, what do you do to connect with people differently? What's maybe the little messier way? And there's a little bit of like digging into why, and then like how people like to communicate. And so one of the things I feel like meaningful engagement looks like sometimes going to an event you know that people are going to be at who are in your in your project, so that you can bump into them and be like, oh, hey, and just like get to know them better so that they feel more like open with you. Or just like giving them an old-fashioned phone call out of the blue several times to see if you can catch them at their desk and find out if like that's the way that they communicate better. And not having any I guess preconceived notions about the time that people have to give. Like if they don't show up to a meeting without telling you, it's not like they're disengaging from the project altogether. Like something could have come up and that sort of thing. So I feel like meaningful engagement can look a little bit messy too, and ad hoc, and very reactive sometimes. So in the latest project I've been working on for this collaborative water quality monitoring strategy, it has been in and out. Like there's been people I like have good relationships with them. We schedule a meeting, it's in person. I provided lunch. I'm like, everyone will be here because there's food, it'll be great. And then a couple of people aren't there that like I've worked long term with, and I'm just surprised I didn't get an email to say like, hey, I can't be there. So I'm like, hey, what's going on? And then it is a little bit of like, okay, I realized that I should have allowed myself more time in my schedule to like make phone calls, to meet up with people, and make sure that I'm not asking too much of their time when they're busy scheduling long meetings. And I got feedback like that, like, hey, that meeting was just too long. I knew I couldn't be there for the whole thing, so I just didn't come. And so I think there's, like Laura said, there's not a formula or recipe for every single project, and it really depends on what the group is. Sometimes those really facilitated, you have 3 meetings for a project and you get what you need, are like perfect for one group of people that are sort of used to that, or they're coming and being engaged because it's a part of their work already, versus the people that are like volunteering some time or something like that.
Absolutely. I think that really underscores when we say meaningful engagement is context dependent, and you have to tailor it to context. And that could be tailoring it to a specific individual. I think implicit in this phrase, meaningful engagement, is meaningful to whom. People derive meaning from different elements of the process, and you really have to be flexible and adaptable, and asking those questions, and hopefully those feedback channels are open. Like you're saying, Hannah, people will be frank with you that, hey, maybe that meeting wasn't the best use of time or needed to be shorter. So I think that's also an excellent segue into our last question before we move on to questions and answers. What is one piece of quick advice that you would give to someone designing a collaborative science project to ensure that it engages people in meaningful ways? What is the one thing? And I know that there's not just one thing, but what is one thing that you would tell somebody they must do?
The softball answer to that is start early, that this is a long process. And starting early may just be me, going to meetings and meeting people who do things that you're interested in. You can't invite the right people to the room if you don't know who they are. So it's not a process that a RFP comes up and you can quickly do it. It's something that you have to plan for beforehand.
Yeah, ditto for sure. And on the same realm of time, I think if I had to choose one, it would be like build in time for your project team to make the mingling magic happen, because some of the best projects I've worked on, we came up with the best ideas and produced the greatest outcomes outside of the time structured within a meeting. So I'm very intentional about like providing food. Like this is a community thing. Like we feel engaged when we feel at community with people that we're working with. I think it was Dawn in the chat said like it drives dedication. Yeah, we have meaning to our work and we come together and we share time just to get to know each other. And so you can really work on that trust building, like in a grant, in the time, build it in there, give yourself funding, give yourself time to do that. I wish I had done way more time than I gave myself for, and I thought I was being pretty generous with my time. So just know that like outside of the recipes, some things can happen if you just give yourself time to make that people magic happen, basically. Get to know one another, go to things where people are. Like if you're working in a community that you don't belong to, go participate, become familiar, be a face that people recognize, and that's going to make collaboration so much easier and meaningful engagement easier, because you're working hard to give yourself time to become a trusted person for the people participating with you.
I love that answer. Actually, both of your answers spoke to the importance of time, and I heard that time and time again in the interviews, that these timeline pieces are so important, and really striking this balance of unstructured time where, as Hannah said, the magic happens. Magic was another word that I heard in my interviews. Magic or chemistry can really happen in those informal spaces. And I think Doug is back here to move us to the question and answers portion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, speaking of time, we are running low, so we want to get to a couple of questions that came in through from the audience. So if you have audience members, please use that Q&A function and pop them in. Thanks, Megan, for the reminder. I think this one you were all sort of exploring it. So I'll just ask it. What are some actionable steps that one can take to establish meaningful engagement between industry and academic researchers? So you were already starting to touch on it, but here's a chance to expand on that one thing. Make it 2 or 3.
Honestly, I think it's not that different than engaging with decision makers or people who are doing conservation. It's just you need to make the time, and part of the issue too is what your employer values. Like sometimes I think that potentially industry folks don't have that extra spare time, and it really does require time. But I don't think the process is different depending on what group you're interacting with.
So I don't have a lot of specific experience working with industry, but one thing I will say is that it seems like, if there's any two groups that don't share the same space, it becomes just hard to start a collaborative process together and engage meaningfully, right? So it's like academics hang out in one place, industry hangs out in the other. So like maybe they both have something that they really want to work on and they want to work on it together, but like how do you make that connection? And I think that could be any two groups. So like where is the shared space? I have found myself at a middle school science fair hanging out with people that work at the plastics factory in Superior and, Walmart on the other side. And here I am, and I met people. So it's like, where are some weird shared spaces where you can just start to find the people that have the same interests as you and where you can get together. So like I said, don't have a lot of experience, but that popped to my mind as like, that was a strange place where I just found some connections and started talking with people, the share the business card thing. And then another more specific one here is that we hold a big summit, and the topic of the summit is the St. Louis River Estuary. And we have all sorts of business and industry folks come there. So we actually, as a reserve, have created an event that is specifically focused on bringing academics and natural resource managers, students, nonprofits, creating this space, because there is that recognition that unless you make it, it's only going to happen incidentally. And that's probably not enough crossover. So that's one thing that we do, is like just create that space for all our partners, both academic and otherwise, to come together.
I'd love to add one more piece to this as well. In part of my other work with NOAA is working on ocean-based climate resilience business accelerators. And one of the things I've learned in that piece of my job is that there are a lot of trade organizations, and you can attend their conferences and meetings, and it's quite effective to meet people in that setting. So within the world that I work in, one of the conferences I routinely attend now is a Marine Technology Society. And so that's a mixture of government people, academics, but really a lot of businesses and small businesses. So you really see people who are kind of bringing that, like, what they built in the lab to market. And so you see some really cool, innovative technologies coming out of those types of places. And so I've built a lot of great, meaningful conversations with people at those types of events, and I think that's very effective. I think we have another question on the question regarding the stakeholders that you engaged, that Pew had worked with in Florida. There was a question here, Laura, about why the consultation with community members, businesses, and other stakeholders was only done after Pew advocated for the adoption of the aquatic preserve. And so why weren't there any consultations done before the decisions were made? I'm not sure if you were involved with that part of the process, and you could speak to that.
A little bit, but I would like to say that I don't want to misspeak behind this. Like, FDEP and University of Florida IFAS folks were working with community members in these areas about different things. We weren't working on establishing a Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve because that wasn't sort of on our radar. That started with Pew's ideas. But I would say that engagement happened well before that as well. Just not. I would say community building happened well before that. Maybe not just engagement on this particular issue.
Thank you for that. Our next question is one I love to listen to hear from the panel on. And the attendee said, please respond to how I feel. Virtual meetings do not build community, especially for hybrid meetings. They treat virtual people as second-class citizens. So I'd love to hear how y'all feel about that, and like if you have seen it effective hybrid situations for building meaningful engagement.
Yeah, I can speak quickly to that. I had a failure with a hybrid meeting, so fully on board with trying to do that better, but maybe it can't be done. It's really, really hard, especially if you have like a limited facilitation staff to like give equal attention to everybody. So I stopped doing that and basically do like, if you could make it in person, come, and we'll do the same thing online with another group of people that can't be there. And that has gone so much better. So I just basically have avoided it like the plague since I kind of had a failure. And it just gone to like, it's great when people can be there in person. And I think a lot of magic happens because of that time you get outside of what's scheduled. But then people live far away and they can't be there in person. We have a mix of both on our project. So I just do it twice, which again, give yourself more time than you need. You might have to do every meeting twice.
I agree with that completely. And I want to add one thing, another like great way to do that is to hire facilitators who have very good meeting skills. That helps as well. But I agree with you 100%. Hybrid meetings are very, very difficult.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this hybrid webinar up, just to play with those last words and those great pieces of advice. For those questions we didn't get to and that were submitted, there are some additional ones that are great. We do ask the participants here to answer them, and so we'll be posting answers later on our website when we send out the recording of this whole webinar. So thank you everyone for attending. I think we are at time, but just real quick, Caitlin, was there anything you wanted to plug from the Restore program? I know Science Collaborative, we're kind of taking the next month off, so we won't have a webinar next month. So, but what about you, Gal?
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, the Restore Science Program actually has a series of webinars happening right now from our projects that were funded in 2019. Those are long-term trends projects, and one of those was the project that I discussed earlier about the Rice's whale discovery in the Western Gulf of Mexico. This series is, the next webinar is going to be on July 29th. And I think my colleague has dropped the registration for that webinar in the chat. Our program is also publishing a new webpage on project examples and resources to support co-production of science. And that is also available in the chat here for everyone to see. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants, Ariana, Hannah, and Laura, for joining us in our 4th installment here. And look forward to the 5th installment next year. We'll have a big celebration. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.